Good afternoon. I'd like to thank each of the distinguished witnesses for being here. Just over a half century ago, President John F. Kennedy laid down a marker in my hometown of Houston, Texas, and made a commitment that, like the great pioneers that came before us, we too would set sail on a new sea and send man to the moon. We embarked upon that endeavor as a nation because opening the vistas of space promised high costs and hardship and enormous reward. Today we find ourselves at a similar crossroad. The year 2015 is just as critical of a time for our national and commercial space programs as was the case a half century ago. Future exploration is certain to present hardships, but it also promises high rewards. New resources, frontiers, and economic opportunities. I'm honored to serve as chairman of this subcommittee. And as the chairman, my first priority for the space component of the subcommittee will be working to help refocus NASA's energies on its core priorities of exploring space. We need to get back to the hard sciences, to manned space exploration, and to the innovation that has been integral to the mission of NASA. We need to ensure that the United States remains a leader in space exploration in the 21st century. SLS and Orion will be critical to our medium and long-term ability to explore space, whether it is the moon, Mars, or beyond. At the same time, I remain deeply concerned about our current inability to reach low Earth orbit. We are right now entirely dependent on the Russian Soyuz system, which is unacceptable from the perspective of space interests and also from the perspective of our national security. Every seat that an American astronaut occupies on the Russian Soyuz costs $70 million. It is imperative that America has the capability to get to the International Space Station without the assistance of the Russians. America should have the capability to launch a rescue mission to the space station, should that prove necessary, and without being dependent on the Russians. America should have the capacity to launch our critical satellites without needing to acquire Russian RD-180 engines. The Commercial Crew Program is critical to restoring this capability. I'm encouraged by the progress, both with regard to commercial cargo and commercial crew. But we need a continued focus on accomplishing the stated objectives with maximum efficiency and expedition. It is terrific to see commercial companies innovating, and as chairman of this subcommittee, I will be an enthusiastic advocate of competition and the enabling of the private sector to compete and to innovate. In 2013, 81 orbital launches were conducted worldwide, 23 of which were commercial launches. Revenues from the 23 commercial orbital launches were estimated to be more than $1.9 billion. The United States accounted for 6 of these launches. There is more that can be done to create long-term predictability for the United States commercial space industry so that launch activity will continue to grow. There is no limit to human imagination or for the desire for exploration. Every one of us, every little boy, every little girl, every man and woman has looked up at the night sky and wondered what lies out there. That is the mystery, that is the vision behind America's space exploration. America has always led the way in space exploration, and we need to reclaim that leadership. And with that, I recognize my friend, the ranking member of the full committee, Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, blossoms are breaking all out over Washington because what you just said, you and I completely agree on. As a matter of fact, I offered in the Armed Services Committee the amendment to start and it passed. It's part of the Defense Authorization Bill to start the process. As a matter of fact, we authorized $100 million. Senator McCain was a co-sponsor of that to develop an alternative to the RD 180. Indeed, we shouldn't be relying on the Russians to ride. We have in the past, in the 2.5 years that we were down after the loss of the Space Shuttle Columbia earlier in the last decade. That was our only way to get up to the space station. And they were a reliable partner then. But now, look at, we can't predict what Vladimir Putin is going to do now. This was part of the speeches that I was making a decade ago as we were trying to get this thing off the ground. And I certainly agree with you, and I am just heartened that you came out with such a strong statement on the commercial crew, because this is going to be a way that we can get Americans on American rockets quicker back into space, since the Space Launch System and its spacecraft Orion are on down further in the decade, even though we've already tested Orion on its first test flight. And so I'm just delighted. And as you know, you and I have talked about this till we're both blue in the face. This subcommittee has always not been bipartisan, it's been nonpartisan. And the subject of the National Space Program is a nonpartisan issue. And so I'm looking forward to cooperating with you as we tried last year. It didn't happen on getting the Authorization Act. We need to get the Authorization Act out of here just for the remaining 6 months of this fiscal year. And then let's start looking to the additional fiscal years behind. And with that, I'll just stop my comments. If I may insert my comments that I had prepared in the record for opening comments. And I'll just end by saying thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator Nelson, for the very kind comments. I hope those are not used against you in your next campaign.
I was going to say the same thing to you. Yours is a little more immediate than mine.
And I want to thank each of the three distinguished witnesses who are here. This is a wonderful way to begin the new Congress and the jurisdiction of this subcommittee by focusing on the overarching goals that NASA should be focusing on, our objectives, and I cannot think of a more distinguished, a more experienced, a more respected panel than the three witnesses who are with us today. We have first Colonel Walt Cunningham, former NASA astronaut and Apollo 7 pilot. We have next Dr. Buzz Aldrin, a former NASA astronaut and Apollo 11 pilot. And we have Mr. Michael Massimino, a former NASA astronaut and mission specialist for the Space Shuttle program. And I thank each of the three of you for taking time from your busy schedules to join us. We will begin with Colonel Cunningham's testimony.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts on where I believe our space program has been slipping and some of the things I believe NASA must do to maintain America's lead in space exploration. While this is my personal opinion, it is shared by many of my contemporaries. Some additional points are in my written testimony that I hope you will all read. Humans have always been driven to explore the unknown and to open new frontiers. Opening a new frontier demands three things: resources, technology, and, most important, the will to do it. In 1961, America was willing to take the risk of going to the moon. When President Kennedy made his commitment to land a man on the moon, not a single American had yet been in orbit. The success of the Apollo program was due to the collective efforts of 400,000 members of our team, engineers, operators, managers, and contractors. With the whole world watching, we accepted the challenge, took the risk, and changed the way that we all perceived our world. We accomplished a landing on the moon in 8 years. Today, 45 years later, the next frontier, Mars, seems decades out of reach, primarily because we do not have a national commitment. Our Apollo program made America preeminent in space and the world's most technologically advanced nation. It led us to the Space Shuttle, the greatest flying machine ever built by man, the International Space Station, ISS, and the Hubble Space Telescope. The spin-offs have infiltrated virtually all areas of our industry. While NASA's portion of the federal budget peaked at 4% in 1965, it has been below 1% for the past 40 years. While NASA has accomplished many things and made manned spaceflight much more routine, we have not challenged the next frontier, the manned exploration of Mars. That will only be possible if our government initiates and provides the funding for such a program. Over the years, NASA has been subjected to more and more political pressure, and the agency has grown increasingly political inside. This has left employees much less willing to express their opinions freely, and the agency less attractive to the best and brightest of today's young professionals. An example: after trying for years, NASA is still unable to reduce the number of space centers that they operate around the country in order to lower their overhead costs. Congress and local politicians have always won out and saved the one in their district. A commitment to push back the space frontier with a man landing on Mars would drive NASA's budget, while the schedule would be controlled by the rate at which Congress funds it. This could also empower the agency to correct many of the deficiencies that have evolved over time. A Mars exploration vehicle will have to be assembled in Earth orbit. Moving out of Earth orbit would require heavy lift rockets like our Space Launch System and the Orion crew capsule. A reusable launch vehicle similar to our space shuttle may be necessary in order to assemble an interplanetary spacecraft. While these are all costly, they will be essential in order to move humans out of Earth orbit. Any Mars exploration program will have international partners. In that partnership, NASA should take a strong leadership role, as they did back in the Apollo program, and not just be one more partner in an international effort. Hopefully, it would encompass less politics and be better structured than the ISS partnership. ISS, that we gave birth to in the 1970s, is probably the most impressive piece of space hardware ever placed in orbit. While leading the international partnership, we transferred $3 to $5 billion to Russia to help resurrect their space industry, increased our cost of the program by $15 to $20 billion, and we are now totally dependent on Russia to get American crewmen to and from the ISS. The success of our space program has always been dependent on private industry, and they delivered. As NASA grew less entrepreneurial, less efficient, and more bureaucratic, they inspired new, so-called commercial space companies. While most of these companies have been subsidized by government funding, NASA has less control over their development, operations, and consequently the results as they did in the past. Some people suggest that private space companies should collaborate with NASA for space missions beyond Earth orbit, which means sharing the cost. While commercial companies will always contract with NASA for the hardware and the technology, the government will always be expected to pay the cost of exploration, funded by tax dollars, of course. Space exploration is far too expensive for commercial companies that are driven by profit and return on investment. Space exploration does not satisfy either of these criteria. Government agencies are not profit-driven. Government underwriting permits our agencies to guide, develop, and manage the technology. Our country's return on investment is the private industry commercialization of the technology that's developed. Since commercial companies move much faster than government agencies, production by private industry will shorten the timeline for a launch to Mars. In the absence of a Mars exploration program and limited funding, NASA has initiated the asteroid redirect mission, possibly to the Lagrange points. Today, they justify it as a first step in the mission to Mars. Anything it might do that could help a Mars mission could be more efficiently done with some other projects. While we work on overcoming the problem of radiation exposure and trying to speed up travel, we should return to the moon to develop a crew facility for semi-permanent living. Many scientists today are saying, send robots to Mars because humans are too costly and it's too dangerous. NASA should continue to exploit both manned and unmanned missions, but humans will always be much faster and more efficient because we can think and act in real time. There are two things I believe we should focus on also. Eliminating permanently any dependence on other countries for launch capability. 2, find some way for NASA administrators to become less subject to changes in the administration every 4 years. The Apollo program took 8 years and cost $110 billion. That's in today's dollars. And the benefits to our society have been priceless. A manned landing on Mars will probably take twice as long and cost up to 3 times as much in today's dollars. That is a fraction of what our annual federal budget deficits have been running, and deficits do not have a return on investment. The human desire to explore and settle new frontiers will be satisfied, if not by Americans, then by others. Humans, somewhere, will certainly return to the moon and go on to Mars. I believe that we have the resources and the technology, but do we have the will to tackle the next frontier, Mars? Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Cunningham. Dr. Aldrin.
Senator Cruz, Senator Nelson, Markey. Senator Cruz, Senator Nelson, Senator Markey, Senator Udall. Senate Committee on Space, Science, and Competitiveness. I wish to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak with you about the future of American human spaceflight enterprise. This is truly an honor, and I applaud you for raising this issue so early in this session. America must be the world leader in human spaceflight. There is no other policy area which so clearly demonstrates American innovation and enterprise than human spaceflight. American leadership is more than simply getting one step ahead of our global competitors. American leadership is inspiring the world by consistently doing what no other nation is capable of doing. We demonstrated that for a brief time 45 years ago. If we wish to retain American leadership in space, I believe that early in the next administration, the nation must commit to developing a permanent presence on Mars. Another Apollo-like mission to put flags and footprints on Mars does not ensure sustained leadership, and lunar settlements will only require a small step for the other nations to catch up. I have a multi-decadal plan with compelling vision that will establish world leadership for the remaining of the century and initial landings on Mars by 2038. It's an integrated plan that knits together return to the moon on a commercial and international basis, leveraging asteroid rendezvous and settling Mars on a carefully developed risk mitigation architecture. It includes the use of a robotic cycler between Mars and Earth that will revolutionize the economy economics, and safety aspects of human missions to Mars. Much analysis has been done on this concept in partnership with the commercial sector, the international community, and especially the academic community. All this can be done without being a major budget buster for NASA. The architectures I have developed are driven by several technical principles which I believe are essential to achieving this goal. These principles are part of what I call my unified space vision. 1, current programs for commercializing crew and cargo transportation to the International Station could expand to provide transport of crews with lifeboat rotations to 2 redundant stations on either side of the moon. The U.S. will lead other crews from these stations for distant controls of the assembly and checkout of habitational structures and their life support systems. Also, intricate rovers will provide ice to rocket fuel resources and other resources. We also have a reliable, develop, and test most of the systems needed for Mars. We should participate in lunar development, but avoid getting our human spaceflight budget captured by lunar gravity's expensive consumption of funds. Let's establish a lunar infrastructure which barters visits to the surface on international landers. Number 3, reduce the cost of sustaining a presence on Mars by deploying outbound cycling spaceships that orbit between Earth and Mars without requiring a great deal of propulsion. Each successive mission would only have to send astronauts, landers, and the minor provisions. The en route provisions are reusable on the cycler, radiation protection. The vast majority of the mass would remain in the orbit between Earth and Mars. Number 4, focus on people to Mars to stay. Bringing everyone home after a relatively brief stay is a cost driver. I envision many of the people who go to Mars to remain and establish a permanent settlement. We've developed an inbound cycler as a means of bringing people back for certain contingencies. But the cost of effectively sending the entire launch system to return everyone home on every mission can make the entire venture prohibitively expensive. I provided most of the detail in my written statement, and we'll have a much more complete version of this plan once the study of my cycler concept is conducted by an Aldrin Purdue study that will be finished near the end of April. In closing, I encourage you to think about the ability of free markets in space to reduce the cost and power of American ingenuity to solve the most difficult technical challenges. In my opinion, there is no more convincing way to demonstrate American leadership for the remainder of this century than to commit to a permanent presence on Mars. I thank you for your time and look forward to the committee's leadership.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aldrin. Dr. Massimino.
Chairman Cruz, Ranking Members Nelson and Udall, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you very much for having me here today. I've got to do some cool stuff in my life, and this is right up there. I really am honored to be here. Thank you. I want to describe to you a few things that I learned as an astronaut, some benefits that our space program has provided, not only for our country, but I think for the whole world. And there's 3 of them I want to point out from my personal experience. And then I want to tell you a story from one of my space flights that I think kind of wraps it up. So that's what I'm going to try to do. The first benefit I want to tell you about is how the human exploration program can benefit science and life on Earth. And there's lots of examples we can use, but the one I'm most familiar with is the one I got to participate in firsthand, and that's the Hubble Space Telescope Servicing Program. Both of my shuttle flights were to the Hubble Space Telescope. And Hubble has given us some great discoveries. So far, won Nobel Prize, and I say so far because I think there's a lot more coming. 25th anniversary of the telescope is in orbit is coming this spring. And it's given us a window into the universe out there. It's found black holes, dark matter, dark energy, inspired many people to continue studying the universe, and it's shown us the beauty and the wonder of what's out there. But none of this would have been possible without human exploration, without the shuttle program, spacewalking astronauts, our ground control team to be able to react to problems and get the job done so that we can provide that great instrument to the astronomers and scientists on the ground. So the human exploration program and how it can affect science and benefits on Earth. The second thing I want to point out is international cooperation. When I was a new astronaut in 1996, we were starting to work with our international partners to build the space station. None of the elements had launched yet. And sitting there listening to the briefings as a new person, not knowing really what was going on at the time, I wondered, how are we going to make this work? How are we going to work with all these countries of Europe, with Japan, with Canada, and with the Russians? The U.S. was clearly going to be a leader, but how are we going to work with everybody? Different cultures, different languages, different ways of doing things, different systems of measurement. How are we going to make this all work? And what I discovered was when we all had a common goal, it didn't matter what country you were from. We wanted to build a space station. We wanted to produce this laboratory. And with that common goal, we were able to achieve a great thing, which is the International Space Station, which is orbiting above us right now. So international cooperation is the second benefit that I discovered of the space program. And the third is inspiration for young people. Okay, I'm sitting next to two of my boyhood heroes. I watched this man walk on the moon when I was 6 years old, and it changed my life. And it inspired me to become an astronaut. And most of the, not too many younger than me can remember that, but the ones who are at least my age and older that I trained with will point to that episode, what Walt and Buzz did as astronauts that inspired us as young people. And as an astronaut, I often wondered, what are we doing now that's going to get this next generation of American kid interested in studying math and science and going to space? And it never was really clear to me until lately. This past year, I've been teaching up at Columbia. Now I left NASA. I'm a professor up at Columbia, and there are some smart kids up there, right? And what I found was they are just as excited as me and my colleagues were years ago about the space program. And it's not just NASA inspiring them. I've had lots of students who have gone to work for NASA, different NASA centers, for NASA contractors. But these kids want to change the world, and they want to be entrepreneurial. They see the space program as a way that they can be entrepreneurial. They see these really smart, successful entrepreneurs putting their efforts into trying to help the economy through space. And they see these people as role models that they want to follow. So it's almost, I think, better than when I was a kid in some ways, because it's not just NASA doing big projects, it's also this entrepreneurial spirit where they think they can provide economic benefits for the world as well. The story I want to tell you. On my second space flight, or my first space flight, my second spacewalk, I had a chance to look around during the spacewalk. And at Hubble, we're about 100 miles higher than where the station was, nowhere near as far as Buzz was away from the planet. But I was able to see the curvature of the Earth, and you can see it in its entirety. It takes up your whole field of view, but it's really beautiful. And my first spacewalk, I kind of stuck to my job. And my second spacewalk, I wanted to see what it was like. And there are really no words to describe to you how beautiful our planet is from up there. So I'll just tell you what was going through my mind. And the first thought was, if you were in heaven, this is what you would see. If you could be up there in heaven, you could look down on our planet and you would see how beautiful it is. And I was thinking about it, and it wasn't enough. And I thought, no, there's more than that. It's more beautiful than that. This is what heaven must look like. And at that moment, I felt like I was looking into paradise. That's how beautiful our planet is. It's fragile, it's a paradise, and we need to take care of it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for that powerful and evocative imagery as well. I appreciate each of you being here, appreciate your expert judgment. I think all of us here agreed that America should lead the world in space exploration. We have done so for decades. But I would like to start by just asking the panel, how good a job are we doing today? leading the world in space exploration, and how could we do better?
We're not really leading the world. We have
If you would hit your microphone, please.
We have a facility up in space, and we've invested a lot in it, and we've gone to it, put it together, gone to it for quite a while, and then we changed our spacecraft to move to another program, and that program didn't come together because of problems with the booster not being powerful enough, so we had to go to another booster to take a spacecraft from a company that hadn't built a spacecraft before. So it was gaining weight and wasn't able to put itself and the lander into lunar orbit. So we had to make the lander even bigger. And that same rocket for Ares 1 was being used on Ares 5. So it just appeared as though we weren't able to get the crew up there with the existing rocket. So we continued to develop the Orion and sort of shelved the heavy lift vehicle. And without an Orion going somewhere, there's no point in continuing the lander. So the program really fell apart. Good. Excuse me.
Just tell us if that's a call from the space station.
Make sure it's not collect.
You know, Colonel Cunningham, you talked about what you perceive to be excessive politicization at NASA and the challenges that presents. I was curious if you could elaborate on that and what steps could be taken to help NASA focus on what should be its core mission.
I mentioned a little bit of the politics from outside of NASA that's increasingly, over the years, it's grown increasingly on NASA. And it's had a lot to do with controlling with what projects they went into, what they did not. But it also, in my opinion, from the outside, looking at it, it's infected the agency itself. People inside of NASA are just not as willing to speak their mind on things to get them done. And some of these programs that money's been spent on and money's been canceled, and we tried a single stage to orbit one time, I think $1 billion on that. So what's happened is NASA has changed, in my opinion. They have become a much more risk-averse agency over the years. For example, we all realized that until we launched the Webb telescope, the Hubble Space Telescope is the greatest telescope we've ever had. Well, we're going to have the use of the Hubble Space Telescope for at least another 5 years, it looks like. But that wouldn't have happened had we not had the last servicing mission that went up there to service it. And that mission originally was going to go up a couple of years earlier, and it was canceled by then administrator at the time because he said it was too risky, and they canceled it because they had lost some people on Columbia. So it's a mental kind of thing. Back in Apollo, we lost a crew on Apollo 1. We had people that were just fortunate they're still alive from Apollo 13. But you have to have the will to keep going. Fortunately, we had another administrator that came on after that one, and that administrator took a look at it. It was worth the risk. They went back and had the last servicing mission, and we had the greatest telescope in history. So I don't know how to do this, but because our society seems to be moving more risk-averse, but we need to have an agency that understands you've got to pay your money, take your chances, and get out there and push the frontier.
When it comes to priorities in NASA, there are a host of exploration priorities that have been discussed, whether it is asteroid retrieval, whether it is going to the moon, whether it is going to Mars, whether it is going beyond. I would welcome the views of the witnesses on this panel as to what the top priorities of NASA should be, which of those projects yield the greatest benefits, what order should they be staged in, and to what extent should the focus be on manned exploration versus robotic exploration?
Well, I can't tell you what degree, and I'm not an expert and totally up on internal affairs at NASA anymore at all, but as I watch it, I find that what NASA has been trying to do for, over the last couple of decades, they recognize that the public at large is looking for a demand for going to the next frontier, which happens to be, it's Mars now. And so they've also attempted then to rationalize whatever they were working on as a step along that program. Some of the things that they proposed certainly will have scientific value to scientists. Will they help us on that program? I doubt it, and there are other ways of doing that. For example, you don't hear NASA really talking about returning to the moon now. I used to be one of those that was not wild about stopping at the moon in order to get back to Mars. But I began to realize that we have to have a facility that's going to keep people alive on Mars, and it's going to be a whole lot cheaper and easier to develop on the moon than the other way. So I just think we need to get back on a program that's going to have the moon as an intermediate step, and only as it fits in to go to the next frontier, Mars.
You know, it's interesting because Buzz was talking about going to Mars and Walt, moon and Mars, and I left the astronaut office in this past July, and we used to talk about this for years. You know, where are we going next? You know, we're going to go beyond Earth orbit. Where we're going to go, and you can make an argument, I think, for almost any one of them. But I think the thing that has in common is we need to go somewhere, and I do think that NASA does have a plan to take us away from low Earth orbit. We're working with the companies that have been selected to provide. We've already got cargo going to the station, and now we're going to have astronauts flying to the station with the commercial crew. That's the plan. I think that seems like it's taking the right steps and going in the right direction. But the opportunity, the ability to leave the planet, to leave our orbit, is common to all of those things. So I've been thinking about this. What would we pick the destination? Which one do we pick? Because there's so many arguments, right? Yeah, you're going to get different opinions from, people change their mind in the same day when we talked about it, right? Oh, that's a good point. Maybe we don't exactly know exactly where we should go, but we know we want to go somewhere. If we can get the lift capability, the Orion capsule ready to go. We had the test back in December, which was successful. They have a plan for another one in a couple years. It's picked up a lot of momentum. A lot of my friends, I was working on it when I was in the office. A lot of my friends are still working on those displays. People are spending money. They're building hardware to go. Whether that destination is to the asteroid, whether that destination is to the moon or Mars, I think we're probably going to get clear on that as we get a little bit further. Maybe we can go all the way to Mars. Maybe the propulsion research and technology we develop can get us there quicker. Maybe not. Maybe we can go to the moon. Maybe not. Maybe we can go to the asteroid. If that's the closest case, the one that's least cost that's going to keep us in a budget, maybe that's the right answer. But I think they are taking the right steps to get away from low Earth orbit. I think you can make an argument for each one of these. Maybe the idea is that we plan on leaving, take those steps now, and it might be clear to us where that destination is going to be a few years from now.
Let me see if I can integrate these things together. In the 60s and 70s, we learned how to go and land on the moon and stay and do some things there. To do that again 50 years later just does not seem to be something that would be attractive to the people involved or the people who are supporting this. We did not build permanent there. Other countries will build landers. While they are doing that, we can build the permanent structures, but those permanent structures will be the same ones in the same base design that we will do at the moon. In order to build those on the moon, we need a fairly redundant facility on the near side and on the far side to robotically build those. We can design them with our concepts of a base, and we know that Europe has a company that builds pressure vessels for the space station, and they can get additional resources from South Korea and India, so they can build the modules that will go to the moon. Based on our design, they need to be standard. And we have uneven terrain and a gravity field, so you pick one off of a lander and put it where you want it. Now another lander is over here. You pick this one up and bring it over. they won't line up. You've got to level them. You got a difference in elevation. You've got to account for that. This is too much for the students at Purdue. It will be done, but I'm going to another resource to help the students in Purdue to, in their study to do that. But the habitats that will be based on what we want at Mars will then be exercised at the moon. Before we do that, we'll use the big island of Hawaii to make sure that the things all come together. We need an inflatable right away at Earth orbit, L1 and L2. We'll develop a rigid and we'll put it at those two places. Those rigids are what we construct things on, and they're the ones that, that will be similar to what we're going to build and send to Mars, with a buildup so that at the time our cycling system deposits the first people on Mars, that buildup will be complete. So we have something that's integrated. Now, what can we do with that inflatable and Orion? Well, we could send it to an asteroid, and we could send a robot, year-and-a-half mission, and the crew gets there in 4 months, 2 days before. But it's got 60 days at that asteroid with a scientist who knows about asteroids, a robotic scientist. That's a crew and a robot at the same asteroid in place. Now, that's with the inflatable. When we get to the rigid, we can send Orion with the rigid on a round flyby of Venus. We can do that in a year. It takes a whole lot longer to do it at Mars. When we come back, we can exercise aero capture maneuvers that need to be done at Mars. So we'll be doing these things, and we'll be landing. Different people will be building and landing, and we'll be getting these habitats. The different habitats, 9, we'll take 3 of them, and we condition it for it's the cycler. And we get it in its cycle, and then we use 3 landers for triple redundancy. And because all a lander has to do is to get on the cycler supplies it with everything it needs, it gets off and lands. And the facilities are there for them to take care of. And each pass that outbound, we reuse the same facilities, so we don't have to build them again. And we can have an inbound cycler that can bring people back in emergencies. It's a plan that is built and integrated, evolving as we go along.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Senator Nelson.
Mr. Chairman, I want to defer to Senator Udall, and I would just say, with our goal of going to Mars, going to an asteroid, going back to the moon, if we're going to the moon, then show me the money. That's the question as we're going forward on the budgets that we are projecting. And I'll get into that a little later when I get to my questions.
Thank you, Chairman Cruz, for calling this important hearing, and Ranking Senator Bill Nelson, thank you for your courtesies and allowing me to go forward first in questioning on this side. And thank you to the witnesses. You've given some very impressive testimony. Thank you for your service today. Scientific research and improving technology transfer and commercialization is smart investment. There's just no doubt about it. And it's vital to our nation's future and for national defense and for our economy. In my home state of New Mexico, we know this firsthand. NASA workers in New Mexico support crucial missions, including communication with the International Space Station. Astronomers at our research telescopes are making new discoveries about black holes and planets outside our solar system. One of those astronomy operations is called the Very Large Array, which is in New Mexico and does a lot of that work. Researchers at our national labs and universities are working hard to keep America safe and to create jobs through innovative technologies like advanced photonics. So I look forward to working with Chairman Cruz and the Ranking Senator Nelson on legislation before this committee, including America Competes Act, the Commercial Space Launch Act, and NASA's reauthorization. And I also want to thank Senator Nelson. As our previous chairman, under his leadership, the Senate passed the bipartisan NASA Authorization Act of 2010. Very few senators have been astronauts like Senator Nelson. He may be the most passionate advocate for space exploration who's ever served in the Congress, and I'm honored to serve with him on this committee. Now, Dr. Massimino, and I put the rest of my opening statement in the record, but Congress passed the last NASA Authorization Act in 2010, as I just mentioned. This law continues to guide NASA as a multi-mission agency. And to quote that multi-mission from the statute, quote, balanced and robust set of core commissions in science, aeronautics, and human spaceflight and exploration. Could you share your thoughts on the advantages of keeping NASA as a multi-mission agency, which encompasses not just human spaceflight, but also initiatives such as space-based observations of the Earth?
When I was, my time as an astronaut, there was a lot of things going on in our country. You know, we had military situations, we had economic effects, a lot of things happened. And I kind of got the sense that as a government agency, if we had resources that could help, whatever that meant, to whatever our country needed, that it was important for us to try to contribute what we could. So you make the example of you mentioned Earth observations, for example. Well, on the International Space Station, it was a great engineering project, international. It's amazing that this thing is up there, this great laboratory, and we can do a lot of basic research up there. But in addition to that, we're able to have this perch above our planet where we can take amazing photos. In fact, my students in my class, we're doing our project for the semester is an astronaut assistant to help them take these photos. And the reason is it's not just fun photos. They can show us natural disasters that occur. You can get a lot of information from them. Changes in the planet, whether it be irrigation problems or volcanoes erupting or whatever it might be. There's a lot of science data that can come and help our country, help our planet, by astronauts taking photos from the International Space Station. It might be somewhat of a simple example, but I don't necessarily think it is. We're using our resources to help other agencies and improve life and increase our understanding. So I think if there's a way that NASA can contribute to that, and I'm not a NASA guy anymore, but I always felt when I was as an astronaut, if there's anything I could do to contribute that would help our country or help the world, that we owed us to do that. It may not be our primary focus, but guess what? We maybe can make a contribution in those areas as well.
Just a quick question, because I only have a few seconds left, but it seems to me there's a great potential to develop the STEM fields in terms of
Absolutely.
what we're talking about here. Could you just talk a little bit about that in terms of?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I found, again, a lot of this comes from my more recent experience as a university professor, that the kids need something to be excited about. Studying math and science, I'm not as smart as Buzz was at MIT. Buzz was a really smart guy. I struggled up there. It was tough, okay? And I needed inspiration to hang out and hang in there and get through. And I think that a lot of students today need that as well. It's not easy studying this stuff. And if you have a goal at the end that, hey, if I can finish this up, maybe I can make a contribution to whatever technology they're interested in, that's the kind of motivation they need. I have not found any field. I would throw the challenge out there. Do you find anything else that could inspire kids, young people, to study those fields other than the space program? I haven't found it. It encompasses so many different areas. It excites them. It's something they think is really cool. It's the future. It's making a contribution back to the planet. They just love it. And now when you add this opportunity to be entrepreneurs, I think we're really onto something. So I can't think of anything that would excite them more. And I see this in New York City, which doesn't have its own NASA center up there. There's not so much of a presence as we have in other parts of the country. There still is great interest up there.
Thank you very much. And I've seen that with astronauts that travel to New Mexico, the excitement is there with the young people in terms of all of the STEM fields. So sorry to excuse myself. The Senator Kerry's in Foreign Relations. I hope to get back and ask some additional questions, but thank you both, Senator Nelson and Senator Cruz.
Thank you very much. Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing today. And I'll be following my colleague from New Mexico on the way up to the Foreign Relations Committee after the the question and dialogue we have here. You know, I don't think there's anything, as you said, Mr. Massimino, that captures the human imagination like exploration. And 28 years ago, I think it was, probably around 1983, I wrote a letter. I would have been 9 years old. I wrote a letter to NASA. Here's the copy of the letter. Took a picture of it because it's not on email. It's a hard copy, typed out letter. And this is the response back from NASA. This is the first paragraph that they wrote back to me in my letter to them. Thank you for your recent letter and your interest in wanting to become an astronaut. We are especially happy to have the young people of the world show an interest in our space program. We have received hundreds of letters similar to yours. Now, I doubt if they're receiving letters today, they're receiving emails today, and I doubt if they're only receiving 100, they're probably receiving thousands. But this letter talks about the need to go into mathematics, the need to go into engineering or medicine. It talks about the importance of our space program. They also sent a little photograph of the crew. I think it was this is Sally Ride. It was STS-7, I believe, the first woman in space from the United States on the space shuttle program, and obviously first woman in space from the United States. But that was 28 years ago, actually more than that now, but it was 2011, 28 years since I wrote this letter to NASA, 2011, 1983. And I stood with my colleagues in the House of Representatives as we watched the closing of the chapter of the space shuttle program. So I was 9 years old writing a letter about how I wanted to become an astronaut. Obviously, I failed miserably at it. But 28 years later, standing in the cloakroom of the United States House of Representatives with my colleagues from around the country, watching this program come to an end, the program that had made me so interested in wanting to achieve more. I mean, Horace Greeley said, "Go west, young man." And we followed that phrase in American history, and we explored, and we fought, and we pioneered, and that's who we are. And so I'm so concerned about the testimony today, the comments that you made, that we aren't capturing that imagination like we once were, that we're not driving new innovation. We are driving new innovations like we were, but how do we really instill that notion of exploration and really make it a reality? And it goes to the heart, I think, of what you've talked about today in the Orion program, and I want to kind of get to that. We did the test launch. We did the test launch of the Orion December 5th, 2014. We did it atop a ULA Delta IV Heavy rocket. We tested this, and now it doesn't look like we're planning to carry astronauts until 2021. Can this country afford to wait to 2021? Can we wait that long? What can we do to push this up? How do we, again, capture that imagination that drives so many of us to imagine, to aspire to space? So I guess I'd start, what is it that we need to do to really drive this mission, this idea, this value of space? It's not just reports and paperwork, it's something that we've got to do ourselves.
I think it would help to refocus NASA back on what they did that did provide that inspiration. Just to give you another thought, I was listening here about the STEM education. I am a strong believer in that. That's what my education was. It's what probably everybody here's education was at this table. We work with the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. We give, now we're up to 30 or 32 awards every year for this kind of education. But if we look at the organization NASA is also giving out many scholarships now. Now, NASA is a space agency. I think that if they're going to be giving scholarships, and if the funds can maybe be diverted to some place where they focus on that, NASA needs to be spending their time and their focus on those things that inspire people to do these. Exploration is what I happen to believe the long-term look at it. But they need to be spending their money on those things that inspire others to make their scholarships derived from other places. I work with scholarships all the time. I believe in them. But I think that the agency is just one more thing that they probably have, let's just guess, maybe a couple of dozen people that are working just focusing on that, as opposed to doing what they did before and letting the inspiration drive those things. It's just another alternative I'm raising about it.
Dr. Aldrin. Please.
I'd like to tell a little story about the months before I left NASA in 1970. I was asked to go down to another center where the next program to follow Apollo was being looked at. And there were hundreds of aerospace engineers. And let me describe what the next system was. And this is 1970. We may have flown Apollo 12 and maybe 13. It was two-stage, fully reusable. An orbiter with wings and wheels and a booster with wings and wheels. And it carried the crew. It didn't carry cargo. You want cargo, you use a reusable booster and you put the cargo on top of that. So I went down there to look at the assembly of people. They had 7 teams, a contractor for a booster and the orbiter. 7 of those. And some of them doubled up, of course, here and there, and they built models. So my job was to look at the upper stage, the orbiter, okay? And to see what the people could see during launch, orbit, and come down and land. And I happened to glance down and I saw windows in the booster. Okay, I can explain that now for high-speed taxi and such, but I asked the guy, what are these windows here? Oh, when we go up as a booster on a normal mission, we've got a cockpit with 2 people in the booster. I said, you what? We have 7 teams, and before they started their study, we asked them to do a real short study, manned versus unmanned booster. Now, if you're one of these 7 teams, and you know what the client wants, and if you give him what he wants, you're going to make more money. Obviously, all those reports said, yes, you're right. We're going to put a cockpit of 2 in the booster. Totally unnecessary. By the time that started getting implemented, George Gilruth said to another person, I wonder if we should have put a cockpit in the booster. Okay? It was canceled. We had to rush into the shuttle. We would love to have a program like that now, but it was because jealousies of individual centers and wanting to do things and the companies wanting to take a bid that would get the more money and maybe bring it back to where their states were doing things. That was inexcusable to me. And there are other examples like that. We've got 3 different spacecraft to come back, commercial spacecraft, and 1 advanced one that's been looked at by the Russians, looked at by the Air Force, and wind tunnel tests, and it brings things back. What do we finance? The 2 capsules with not really new technology, and we don't finance the one that can land on a runway. I think we're making not so good choices many times.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Nelson.
First of all, I want to welcome our guest, dear personal friends, and thank you for what you've done for this country, each of you in your own contribution as we have built this amazing thing that we're discussing today, our American space program. The goal is to go to Mars. The goal is to get NASA beyond low Earth orbit. And the question is, over the course of these years, as we target the decade of the 2030s, with the budget that we're going to have, how do we do it? How do we develop the technologies, the techniques, the systems, the life support systems, the propulsion systems that will get us to a foreign body such as Mars with a crew and return them safely? So we may want to go back to the moon as we develop this, but as I said earlier, show me the money. Dr. Massimino, I want to ask you to comment on the plans to capture an asteroid, bring it back into a stable lunar orbit, and send a crew up there to land on it. That as part of the steps as we prepare all of those things I just mentioned, eventually to go to Mars in the decade of the 2030s?
Thank you, sir. I think we need to remember one thing overall, that going to space is hard. And I think we need to remember that there's only been one country that has put people out of Earth orbit, and that's us. And we did it a long time ago when we sent Buzz and his colleagues up there. But still, the United States of America is the only country that's been able to figure that out. It's not so easy going to space. It's not so easy. It's even harder to go beyond low Earth orbit to places like the moon or to Mars. And if we decide we're going to take an incremental approach, which would be the asteroid mission, I think there's definitely a lot that can be learned there. We can test this big rocket that can take us places beyond low Earth orbit. We can test a spacecraft that would do it. We can test life support. Space is a very hazardous place. There's a lot of radiation, and it gets worse as you get further away from the planet. The radiation dose we took on Hubble was higher than what the men and women get on space station, because we were 100 miles higher. Going to the moon's even worse. Going beyond that's even worse. We need to understand how we can protect our people from that, right? And we're taking those steps with the research we do on the space station. How are we going to keep them healthy? All the changes that happens to the body. How are we going to keep people healthy enough to be able to withstand a journey to Mars, be able to land a spacecraft, and be able to work and then come home? This is tough stuff. We may or may not be able to do that all in one big swing. It may be too much to do it in one swing. But I think we need to start taking those first steps. First step is get the big launch vehicle going, like we have with a successful test flight, and the other ones that are planned. They are far in the future, but these are tough things to do. And I don't know if more budget would make it quicker. I don't know. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. Maybe it would give you a better chance of getting there, but I don't know if it necessarily makes you more efficient. But these are hard things to do. But if the asteroid mission is the right thing to do, I think there's certainly a lot we can learn from it. I think we can work out the spacecraft, keeping the people healthy, understanding how to work that launch system, and it's also it is a destination. You're not going to land and have to blast off again from it like you went on the moon or Mars, but it is a place you can go to, and we certainly can learn a lot from it. Is it necessary? I don't know. It might be, because we might need that incremental step before we can take the big leap. But I think right now the important thing is to try to be consistent with it. And to pull the rug out from where we are, I think there might be a penalty there as well. There was a couple programs in my career as an astronaut. We worked on different spacecraft. We worked on, I had dinner with two of my friends last night who are now former astronauts out of here in Washington. We talked about all the stuff that was canceled while we were astronauts, all the stuff we trained on while we were astronauts. And to make a big, huge direction change sometimes isn't always the best thing.
Well, you were there in the astronaut office when the Constellation program was canceled. It was way behind, and it was way over budget. So that's what you're talking about.
Actually,
what you sacrifice if you make a major change in the human spaceflight program.
Yeah, and it's a lot of, that was a big one, but there are other ones too, like our cockpit avionics upgrade on the space shuttle. They started doing the wiring on that in one of the space shuttles. It had gone along, we had spent a lot of time designing that upgrade, for example, and then that got cut. And the story we had was that it was going to cost almost as much to pull it out than it was to finish the job. There were other options for spacecraft, rescue spacecraft from the space station that we were developing. They did tests out in the desert, dropped them out of airplanes, landing tests. A lot of cockpit design work was done. Again, these projects were cut. So I think there is a penalty to pulling everything back. And whether we go, again, if we go to the asteroid or we go to the moon or Mars, I think it's important to keep the momentum going of getting the spaceship ready, getting the rocket ready, keeping your options open until you're really sure which one you want to go to, because you might find that you might not pick the right one right off the bat. Maybe we can go to Mars in one swoop, but maybe we can't, and the asteroid mission is a great way to test our systems out and get the knowledge we do, because we want to be successful when we go to Mars. That's a huge leap. That's a really long journey. And that's not even, compared to the moon, it's a long way. This man went a long distance from our planet. That's a heck of a lot further. We're going to make sure we get it right when we do that. And if that asteroid mission or something we do with the moon is going to help us get there, that's great.
Can I add a thought? to the question there having to do with budget. It's always going to be expensive for what they're talking about trying to do. I mentioned that for 40 years, the NASA budget's been less than 1% of the federal budget. For the last 15 years, it's been driving down to 0.4% of the federal budget. Unless the country, which really is Congress here, decides to put more money in it, this is just talk that we're going through here. The budget has got to go up for NASA, and that's another reason why I feel very strongly that NASA has to be operating more efficiently and not doing some of the things which would be marginal as opposed to it. You've got to focus it on what has to be done. NASA's budget is way too low to do the things that we talked about doing here this afternoon.
Absolutely, and I'd like to point out that I've got this study being done at Purdue near the end of April. I've assembled 25 other academic institutions that deal with exploration. Academic institutions are supposed to be unbiased. They're supposed to teach the general background. So if we can come up with a number of questions, some of them are yes, no, maybe. Some of them are tell me shortly. How do we get the public behind what it is we're trying to do? Well, they're going to know what I'm trying to do briefly because I'm going to show them and I'm going to give them my assumptions that I've had to make. What is the strategy to get the public behind us? And what kind of strategy do we need to fund something in 2040? Do we step increase to make up for things? And then do we have a ramp up? Not just cost of living, but a ramp up because expenditures are going to be greater. They did during the Apollo program. Now, another question. Do we have a relationship with China? It's very significant if we're going to deal with leadership. I don't want to get into a lot of that, but I think if we don't, if we really do, or in between, we shouldn't do things differently at the moon. We still should build things there so we can build somewhere else, but we don't have to land there. China needs the things we can build. We have to exert leadership by working with them in low Earth orbit. Next July is the 40th anniversary of Apollo-Soyuz. 75 was pretty contentious in the Cold War, much worse than our relations with China today. Why did we refuse them to come to our space station? It doesn't make any sense to me. We should be doing that sort of thing together, building on, sharing what it is we're doing. They've got a lot of things to do at the moon. We can help them in their permanence because it helps us with our permanence at Mars. They're just, now, if I ask them about asteroid, you can fly it the way it is, you can cancel it, or you can do something smart in between. Now, if you understand what that smart is in between by sending a robot there to an asteroid, then send a crew to it, and on board the crew you got an asteroid scientist, a robotic, and they can stay there 60 days. The combined mission is better than a robot or better than a crew mission. Don't these people talk to themselves in Washington? Why do I have to come up and say if you combine the mission, it's a whole lot better? And you can do it where an asteroid is, like the National Research Council said we should do. But maybe that's not essential. I happen to think it is, where you can fly Orion with a long-duration support system. That's what we're going to do when we go to L1 or L2. We're going to take an Orion up there, and there's going to be a system that lets us stay for much longer. We're going to be rotating commercial crews up and down, not just to the space station, but commercials are going to go to the vicinity of the moon. We're going to do these things, and we're going to build, but we don't have to put all the money in building those habitats because the foreigners are going to want them, and we're going to want them there, and we're going to want them at Mars. The foreigners have to land. Okay, we're going to develop a very sophisticated landing system, and we're going to be landing so many people at Mars that we can take them along on the first landing. Okay, take us along as visitors on your landings. Let's not go broke by doing things back at the moon, but let's astutely learn to do things there that do make sense. And I think if you ask industry or if you ask government, you're going to get a biased answer. But if you ask academia, I'm looking forward to this poll on significant questions coming back from 25 different academic institutions.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to ask one additional question, which is each of the three of you are learned scientists and national heroes. And if I've understood your testimony here today correctly, each of you has discussed as a major objective, a grand goal for NASA going to Mars. I would ask each of you to take a moment to address the American people and, in your judgment, explain the benefits to America and to the world of going to Mars and what will be required to accomplish that objective.
Well, I would start by saying the technology that's required to get us to Mars, such things as radiation or finding new velocities and the like, to do that, that will create the kind of spin-off. We've benefited for 40 years from solving the problems that we had to go to the moon. Some of those were started before, but some of it was totally unexpected. You didn't know what was going to come up, but you solved the problem, and now it's almost like a cancer in all areas of our industry, and we're benefiting from it. The most important thing that has to be done is they have to be willing to pay the money. I am not optimistic about us being able to put the kind of funds out there that ought to, because we're busy spending money in the government for all kinds of things for which there is no return, and for all kinds of things which do not really inspire people. So I just happen to believe it's a good use of money.
Rarely does a time come along in advancement of humankind on this planet Earth that we gain the potential of really demonstrating to ourselves and to the rest of the people the fullest of the challenges. We can put together what's necessary to send people to Mars in an efficient way. And we can do it by stepping up, by using some things at the moon, but not getting bogged down with a lot of investments that are involved in landing humans, building the rockets to land them, and then storing them. We don't need to do that anymore. We can observe how other people store people there, take care of them, but where we want to do that is at Mars. Then we need to invest the things to get to Mars. If we invest in an ascent stage to go along with the people that are going there, it's going to cost more money. Going there with the ascent stage interferes with just the lander. By building that ascent stage and the return capability, it's taking longer to do that in time. The cost per person on the surface of Mars is less if they stay there. If we start bringing people back, okay, the biggest thing to me is as all of this thing comes along on Earth, with humanity being able to advance, to do all the wondrous things, and it's going to cost billions and billions of dollars, and we're going to select some human beings to do that, and we're going to train them, and we're going to send them there. Now, I've gone and come back from a place. Let me ask you, what do you think you're going to do with those people that go there and bring them back to continue to pay off the investment of their being the first, the pioneers, the building up of a growing settlement? They can do far more by keeping Mars occupied, helping the new people that come in. You bring them back and they can visit different places. But if you broadcast from Mars, you can reach everybody in the world because they're going to be listening in. And you can give them the stories of what you've been doing right there while you're there. There's no doubt in my mind that the value that we've invested in people from whatever the country is, and we've put them there on Mars, that's where they need to stay. And they need to know and understand that this is their opportunity to serve humanity.
Thank you, sir. So benefits for our American people, what we could get out of this, what can we imagine we would get if we were to do this grand exploration? I think eventually we are going to have to get off of this planet to learn how to do it for our own survival. Learning what else is out there is great, would help our understanding of where we are in the universe, but also just to have another place where we could live as another place where we could survive would be a good thing for us to have. And so Mars might be that place. So if we decide to go there, it's giving us another option. And if we would decide to go and do this, can you imagine what would be needed, what would be developed in order to get us there? If you look back to what we did when we developed the Apollo program and also the shuttle program, all the new technology and the spin-offs and the benefits that came not just for the space program, but in other industries were tremendous. Now we're going to make a giant leap. We're going to go all the way to Mars. Can you imagine what would come out of that? I think it's also probably going to have some type of international flavor to it, maybe, maybe not. I think the United States would be the leaders of that, I would hope, but I think that we would also maybe be doing with some of our friends. So I think it would be a great thing for international cooperation with other countries around the world, providing that benefit for us. And then I get back to the inspiration. And the inspiration is not just because it's a nice thing to do for kids, it's because that's where our future is. We're going to depend on these people to take care of our planet and build our economy and keep our country strong for many, many years. They may not all go and become astronauts. They may, hopefully they'll have, more people have that option, and keep them interested in the space program. But they may not all go on to do that or even work for NASA or be involved in it. But I do think that exploration, particularly something like you're describing, going to Mars, would inspire them to stay in school and get their education, and maybe they'll find something along the way that they like even better than space. Maybe it'll be better for them, for certain students to go into medicine or study what they can study in the classroom other than going to space. But I certainly think it's going to keep their interest. And I think for that is kind of an intangible benefit that we would get from it as well. But I really see it as an investment in our future to inspire our young kids, and also I think to help our country, our economy for many years to come. I think it would be a glorious thing to do.
Thank you very much. Senator Nelson, do you have any additional questions? Well, then, I want to thank each of the three of you for coming and joining us. This has been a very productive panel, and we will conclude this panel and immediately move on to the second panel that we'll start momentarily. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, the hearing will come to order. Now I want to move on to the second panel, and we are fortunate to have three very experienced witnesses, Mr. John Elbon, Vice President and General Manager of Boeing Space Exploration, Dr. Scott Pace, Director of the Space Policy Institute, the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University, and Mr. Eric Stallmer, President of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. And we will start with Mr. Elbon.
Thank you. Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Nelson, always good to see you, sir. Members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to provide Boeing's perspective on U.S. human space exploration goals and commercial space competitiveness. I want to applaud you both for your opening comments. That spirit of cooperation is heartwarming and absolutely essential to our path forward. Thank you very much for that. America's economic growth and competitiveness depend on our capacity to innovate, to reach beyond today's possibilities, stretch farther and faster than our competitors around the world. Our future depends on developing the next generation technologies, but more important are the next generation minds. Just as seafaring ships explored and returned to home shores, bringing unforeseen discoveries, so too will spacefaring nations reap the benefits of our investment in exploration. Robots are great at helping us scratch the surface, but humans are ultimately needed to truly explore. The success that U.S. space missions have achieved and the recognition that these innovations have gained have made the United States the most attractive global partner for other nations seeking to advance their own space aspirations. This plays a significant role in the United States' soft diplomacy efforts to increase U.S. influence in global affairs and in strengthening our alliances. The International Space Station has been orbiting Earth for more than 16 years. Astronauts have been continuously living aboard the ISS for 14 years. And we have been learning valuable lessons about living and working in space in preparation for sending humans beyond low Earth orbit. The ISS is a model for space cooperation, currently counting 15 nations among the international partnership. Because of the ISS, space is an area where international cooperation remains constant and serves as a bridge for other diplomatic discussions. As a leader and major supporter of the ISS, the United States is in a position to supply a vision for space global exploration. With the ISS, we have demonstrated an ability to build long-term crewed space habitats effectively. The ISS crews are testing technologies required for deep space and working to understand the effect of extended space travel on the human body. What we have found from the development and operation of ISS is that large space programs do best when three conditions are met. First, industry involvement with wide-ranging expertise. Second, long-term, stable government investment. And third, international cooperation. With NASA's Space Launch System capability, we can apply the lessons learned in building and operating the ISS to new endeavors in deep space. We must rally a shared commitment to NASA's vision for the ISS, commercial crew, and super heavy lift Space Launch System rocket, or we risk losing an important investment in the irreplaceable brain trust of decades. NASA has the foundation for sending humans farther into the solar system than ever before through the NASA Authorization Act of 2012, which this very committee passed. We must continue down that path in support of the building blocks that are so important to future success. First, we've invested years of brain power and billions of dollars in the International Space Station as a test bed for preparing for the next leap. Secondly, we have a commercial space program that ensures U.S. launch crew and cargo transport to ISS. The Boeing CST-100 spacecraft combines proven design and spaceflight technology with modern innovation for a reliable and sustainable crew and cargo transportation system. Use of commercial transportation to sustain ISS lowers costs and leaves room in NASA's budget to develop the capabilities for exploration beyond low Earth orbit, SLS and Orion. And thirdly, SLS provides unprecedented payload capability that can enable human and science deep space missions not previously achievable, and last December's flawless launch of the Orion crew capsule returned a great deal of data, which is a huge step towards Mars. Finally, the world space agencies agree that Mars is our ultimate destination. NASA has the programs in place to move down the path towards Mars, starting with the International Space Station as a test bed, commercial crew transportation systems to transport crew and cargo to the ISS, and Orion and the SLS for super heavy lift and crew transportation beyond low Earth orbit. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify here today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Elbon. Dr. Pace.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Nelson, members of this committee. It's an honor to follow the previous panel, and thank you for this opportunity to discuss the important topic of the future of human spaceflight. While space touches every aspect of modern life, I would like to focus on human space exploration, as that topic is the one whose future is most in doubt today. This is unfortunate, as human space activities are among the most interdisciplinary of enterprises, requiring skills from every field of technical endeavor. Their successful accomplishment requires a degree of system engineering skill found only in the most complex and demanding programs. The ability and willingness of a nation to lead such endeavors conveys much about the nature and intentions of that society. It's my argument that international space cooperation, space commerce, and international space security discussions could be used to reinforce each other in ways that would advance U.S. interests in the sustainability and security of all space activities. At present, however, these activities are largely conducted on their individual merits and are not part of an integrated national strategy. International space cooperation is not an end in itself, but a means of advancing national interests. Those interests can be for security, commerce, science, international influence, or any combination thereof. A human space exploration effort driven by geopolitical interests and objectives would provide, and does provide, the historic model and rationale, I believe, for the United States. The next steps beyond low Earth orbit will require international partners for practical and political reasons. Therefore, it makes sense to ask what our partners would like to do and what they're capable of doing in the future. The answer is the Moon, with Mars and other destinations in the distance. A U.S. commitment now to lead a multinational program to explore the Moon would be a symbolic and practical first step, as well as a means of creating a broader international framework for space cooperation. At the same time, the geopolitical benefits of improving relations with growing space powers through greater U.S. engagement could support more ambitious space exploration efforts than science alone might justify. On the commercial side, providing cargo delivery, for example, to the lunar surface would be an attractive post-ISS market for U.S. industry. The volume and duration of that market would be enormously more attractive to industry than the ISS alone could ever be. The Moon is not just a physical destination, but also a means of answering questions, creating capabilities, training organizations, and forging new relationships to serve the interests of the United States and its allies. Through authorization and appropriation bills, the Congress should provide clear direction for NASA on an exploration mission for the 2018-2025 timeframe as SLS, Orion, and other exploration systems currently under development begin operation. The Congress should, in my view, direct NASA to develop mission concepts for an international return to the Moon with private sector partners in anticipation of a new administration in 2017. The United States is crucially reliant on space systems, and the future sustainability and governance of space activities are key strategic interests for us. If we are to have an effective American space strategy, we need to align our policies, programs, and budget priorities with enduring national interests, for that would be the way they will be sustainable. This means looking beyond individual missions and seeking to determine what future humanity might have beyond the Earth and what values will be part of that future. I would like those values to include the things we value today: democracy, human rights, rule of law, free markets. The rules on a frontier are made by the people who show up, not by the people who stay behind. If those values are to be on a human future in space, then we need to be there to ensure them. I close with a quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes, quoting, "I find the great thing in the world is not so much where we stand as in what direction we are moving. We must sail sometimes with the wind, sometimes against it, but we must sail and not drift nor lie at anchor. We need the confidence to choose what course offers the greatest advantage to our nation and our values, and for that I commend this hearing today." Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pace. And I would note that in an afternoon where we are listening to learned scientists, as a lawyer, I appreciate your throwing a Supreme Court justice in there. Mr. Stallmer.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Nelson, and members of the subcommittee and staff. I want to thank you for holding this hearing and for providing me the opportunity to testify as president of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. CSF is an industry association of leading businesses and organizations working to make commercial spaceflight a reality. NASA and the commercial sector are partners in America's great national enterprise in space. Since the dawn of the space program, cooperation between the government and the private sector has been critical to our tremendous accomplishments in space. This cooperation continues to enable us to achieve great things. But the relationship has evolved over time. The relationship that was once defined the United States' nascent space program have given way to a more modern and innovative approaches to procure a wide variety of necessary capabilities and services. My written testimony provides detailed examples of these successful commercial partnerships, but I'd like to quickly highlight a few of these areas where this new alliance has helped move our nation's space exploration goals forward, and areas where we can help with it in the future. The pioneering COTS and CRS programs have led to affordable and robust domestic cargo access to the International Space Station, increasing its utilization for scientific research, technology, and development. A variation of this model is being applied in the Commercial Crew Program, which is developing safe, reliable, and also domestic access to and from low Earth orbit for our astronauts. Finally, private companies are working on building a variety of capabilities to help explore destinations beyond low Earth orbit, of which NASA should leverage the support in its future exploration efforts. Further expansion of the commercial spaceflight industry will create a self-reinforcing ecosystem that will make space ours and will enhance and strengthen our leadership in space. For the past 6 months, I've made it my priority to personally visit all of our member companies all over this great country of ours, from Midland to Mojave, from Seattle and the Florida Space Coast. And here's what I've seen. U.S. suborbital companies are leading the development of reusable vehicles, creating versatile platforms to service diverse markets for research, space tourism, education, and other applications. Orbital providers are increasing access to space for a wide variety of customers, including small-sat, national security payloads, and geostationary communication satellites. This is a positive trend for the United States. After decades of decline, we are finally recapturing market share in the commercial launch sector. In order to support the growth in the launch activities, states have been competitively investing in commercial spaceports to ensure their state economies have a key role in this 21st century business. Finally, within our grasp in space are nearly limitless resources of great commercial value here on Earth. These resources can also be used to help us press onward as explorers deep into the cosmos. Several companies are working to unlock these resources. As you can see from this growing commercial ecosystem, it is not a surprise that we are experiencing private sector investment unlike anything we've seen in history. But to continue this progress, we need thoughtful commercial procurement policies and regulatory certainty. Congress must set policies that encourages growth and innovation in the industry and maintain the U.S. space sector's competitive advantage. As you prepare to reauthorize the Commercial Space Launch Act, you can help provide critical updates. Extending the regulatory learning period that helps our industry innovate rapidly toward ever safer vehicles in practice. Solidifying launch indemnification, which is critical to the competitiveness of our launch industry in the global marketplace. And addressing the questions of how to handle government astronauts in commercial vehicles, and so forth. These and other important issues are addressed in my written testimony. Codifying these policies increase our global competitiveness, promote industry growth, and strengthen our nation's industrial space base, and keep the United States at the forefront of space technology. The commercial space sector is and will continue to be a valuable partner in America's ever more ambitious missions to expand our reach in space. I have 3 young children who regularly ask me, "Daddy, when can we go to space?" And I'm confident from working in this industry that the answer is very soon. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, and I'm going to begin by deferring to Senator Nelson for the opening questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Stallmer, my congratulations to your commercial spaceflight sector because they're being very successful.
Thank you very much, sir.
Indeed, now with the competition proceeding for the commercial crew, we're seeing a lot of innovation coming out, and it's going to be exciting, and this will all be coming more and more into the focus of the American public over the course of the next couple of years. I wanted to ask you, how important do you think extending the ISS beyond its existing termination date in law, which is 2020, how important is that?
It's certainly an important step forward. It's our gem of a national laboratory. The amount of research that has taken place on the ISS is incomparable. I was talking to my colleague, Mr. Elbon, today, of some of the things in his testimony on the scientific and medical research that is being conducted up there, that the practical applications here on Earth are just incalculable. The other great aspect of the International Space Station, as it is today, is the partnership that it has with the commercial sector. On the experiments that we're doing, I was tremendously inspired recently by a trip out to the West Coast, a company called Made in Space, who through several NASA programs, through the flight opportunity programs, was able to build and test 3D printers, first on the suborbital level, and then these 3D printers are up in space right now on the International Space Station. And it came to a point where the astronauts on the International Space Station needed a 5/8 inch ratchet, didn't have it. And they were able to, on the ground from Ames, California, send up the image of this ratchet, and they were able to print it right there on the space station. Fantastic. I think that is the kind of technology, that is the kind of innovation that we're seeing through these partnerships, through the International Space Station, but the commercial, private or public partnerships. So I'm very inspired by that.
Dr. Pace, how could we encourage our international partners to help us continue the space station beyond 2020?
Thank you. I think, first of all, the U.S. has already taken the first really important step, which is to have itself propose to lead the effort to go to 2024 and to work with the other partners to make that possible. So I think it was very important for the U.S. to move first on that. We are, I think, the indispensable nation in that regard. The second thing I think we can do is we can help our partners show how to improve utilization on the station, in part by some of the innovative things that the commercial industry is able to do. At my university last week, we had a workshop when the federal government was closed by snow. Our university was open for a company called NanoRacks, which is putting small CubeSat-sized payloads aboard the space station. And what was very interesting about it is there has been this creation of, as Mr. Stallmer put it, of a kind of an ecosystem around the reality of the government facility, stable, available. Then a whole bunch of other commercial people have been able to build around it, so that a small education establishment was able to go from signing a contract to deploying a small satellite in the space of less than 9 months. Okay, that is an absolutely amazing turnaround time, but it was made possible by the private sector innovations working with a stable, essentially government facility. When the Antares vehicle was lost at Wallops, the company was able to work quickly to remanifest virtually all of those payloads, and is able to find rideshare opportunities for some other satellites. So the innovation that's gone on with the private sector is aiding and supporting the conduct of research and utilization aboard the station, which I believe in turn will help our partners see benefits from continuing to 2024. I would also have to say that that continuation is not guaranteed. Our partners are under great pressure within Europe, Canada, Japan, and we all know the volatility in Russia. So it is by no means an assured thing. It is very fragile. And we need to be looking at what's going to come beyond space station in order to assure people that they can continue on space station today.
And Mr. Elbon, you're right in the middle of it. We're counting on you to be one of those means of transportation for crew to get us up there. You've got a proven workhorse that launches a lot of cargo into orbit. And so are you very positive about this whole commercial sector maturing as we're going forward?
I am. I'll put it in this light. Boeing's going through its 100th year anniversary as a company, and during that kind of reflection of that 100 years, you can see the aviation industry grow from just a starting beginning industry to the incredible industry that it is today. And I think commercial space is at that same pivot point now. The effort that's being done to have NASA serve as the foundational customer for that growth is similar to the way the government participated in airmail in the early days of aviation. And so I think that as we develop vehicles to meet those needs, that capability will grow as we go forward.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to shift to asking each of you, what do you see right now as the greatest impediments to the continued development and expansion of our commercial crew and commercial cargo capacity?
I would say that having the market develop is important. Commercial industries follow the market. So continuing extending ISS, continuing the research on ISS, which by itself is a great thing, independent of commercial crew, provides that kind of a foundation and a starting point going forward. It's important that we maintain the industry in such a way that it's safe and reliable, and don't let public opinion erode because we have accidents that could have been avoided, for example. So we need to keep it as a robust industry moving forward. Things like the CSLA legislation that help with the cost of insurance for launches are important that we maintain that going forward. We need to develop working relationships with regulatory agencies like the FAA, similar to the way we do that in commercial airplanes. It's a really good partnership today, and keeping that going, I think, is important. So those are the kind of things to stimulate the growth of the commercial sector, I believe.
Dr. Pace?
Sir, two things: market demand and a predictable environment for investment. Right now, that demand is predominantly driven by government. To the extent that we can see non-government demand come for a lot of these activities, things beyond the space station, then it will be more sustainable. But that begs the question of what comes really after the space station. Although we're talking about extending to 2025, in aerospace terms, that's just right around the corner. And I think one of the things that I worry about, which contributes both to the fragility of our political relations with other countries, as well as the fragility in the commercial industry, is if you're not planning today as to what you're going to be doing next, what you're really doing is planning to go out of business. And so we need to have, I think, a very thoughtful discussions and decisions very soon as to what not only ISS extension, but also post-ISS, what does that look like, whether in LEO or beyond, because without that, there won't really be that investment environment, nor will there be the international partner environment. So that uncertainty, I think, is the greatest thing we could address.
And Mr. Stomer, you mentioned in your testimony also some suggested reforms in reauthorization of the Commercial Space Launch Act. I would welcome your elaborating a bit on those reforms.
Certainly. Thank you, Senator. I think regulatory uncertainty is a major barrier that the launch industry could face. With indemnification, it's critical for our global competitiveness. Right now, China, France, Japan all indemnify far more than the U.S. So that's critical right now. Extending the learning period. The learning period currently was 8 years. If we want to foster this economy, this space economy that we have right now in the launch industry. We really need to extend that and continue to work together as partners right now with the FAA, because nothing is more paramount to the commercial companies than safety, to developing a safe product. If you don't have a safe product, you're not going to have a commercial product, a commercial business to that extent. So the regulatory uncertainty is critical, but also the funding, knowing for commercial crew, like yourself, I find it completely unacceptable that we have to depend on the Russians to launch U.S. astronauts to the International Space Station. So any sort of disruption in the commercial crew program, I think, would be a tremendous setback. I know how much it pained the NASA administrator to have to extend those flights onto 2018 for contingency purposes. But I think if we continue with the prudent budgetary measures through these through the commercial crew program, I think that is one of the best ways we can move forward, and especially with the Commercial Space Launch Act.
You mentioned concerns about safety, and obviously there is an element of risk that is inherent in space exploration. The safest option would be never to go into space, and so what is the right way for regulation to balance those safety concerns with the desire to continue expanding our capability and exploring new frontiers?
You have to test and learn. You have to test and learn, and as we found that out the hard way this past October with an experimental test flight. But as Americans, I think we're going to continue to push the envelope. This is what we want to do, and we've mentioned our westward expansion goals and just the manifest destiny of the United States. Safety will always be an issue. As my colleague, my predecessor once told me, went down to the Orion launch, because the thing you have to remember that 10,000 things can go wrong and only one thing can go right. And that's something you always have to keep in mind. But it's the redundancy of safety, of testing, evaluating, learning from the testing that you're doing and the data that you collect to move forward. And I think the commercial spaceflight industry is doing that in spades.
Let me ask the panel a different question. What is the shortest time frame we can reasonably no longer be dependent on the Russian Soyuz and also the RD-180, and what would be required to accelerate that time frame to the soonest date possible?
So I'll address that from the perspective of launching commercial crew. We're on a path with CST-100 to be able to launch crew in 2017. That path is paced now by the internal work that we're doing with our suppliers, with our integration and test, going through the certification process that will allow us to certify that vehicle based on the lessons that we've learned on shuttle and station so that it's certified and ready to fly. Our program at the moment is not being paced by dollars. So if the question was hinting at could we apply more money to go faster, at this point we need to apply the level of funding that we proposed in our contract, and we'll be able to achieve that on the pace we're on. Relative to the RD-180, there's been a lot of discussion about the RD-180 today. I would say this, the Atlas V is an incredibly dependable launch vehicle as a system. It has had 53 successful launches, and in fact that's the reason we selected it as our launch vehicle to get going. It would seem that over time it would make sense to work to transition away from dependence on the Russians. I would hope that we don't do that in a very abrupt way that would cause us to impact our national security as a country and also our commercial launch industry. So I'm hopeful that is a thoughtful process and that we work through that in a way that addresses the geopolitical concerns that are out there, but also the technical concerns of being able to keep launching that vehicle.
So how would you define a thoughtful process? Because there is always the risk geopolitically,
right,
that particularly if things escalate with Mr. Putin, that he decides to use access to space as a weapon. And were he to cut off access to either the Soyuz or the RD-180, that would impose significant hardships on the United States. So how would you propose we deal with that potential threat?
Well, certainly we have an inventory of existing engines that are available to use, and there are more engines on order that are coming. And so, you know, keeping that pipeline open as long as is reasonable is good. I don't have insight into exactly where it's going, but ULA has announced that they're working with another company, perhaps for, or maybe other companies, for a replacement engine for the RD-180. And so, you know, working through that in a way that doesn't just declare, okay, that's enough, no more, but using the assets that we have and keeping those assets and that pipeline open as long as we can to facilitate a transition.
Dr. Pace, Mr. Stallmer, do you have thoughts on these questions?
I think the question depends on when you think the immediate risks are. If you thought there is a risk tomorrow or even today, then the answer is, you know, we have the inventory, you know, we have. Beyond that inventory, if your next bet is you have a very expensive option, but a very doable option, which is manifesting on the Delta. Looking beyond that, the answer ultimately, of course, is to have a U.S. source. And the proposals, I think, that have been put forward for building a replacement engine, LOX kerosene, LOX methane engine, the numbers that I've heard have been on the order of like 3 to 4 years that it would take to do that. Perhaps that could be accelerated a little bit on money, but I think there probably are some parts that you can't accelerate, and you're talking 3 to 4 years. So if you think that the crisis with Russia is not going to go away and is going to be with us for some time to come, then the answer, in my view, is to begin development of that engine, and to do so now. If it turns out that everything works out great or we have other options come up, that's fine. But if we don't have that option, then we will find our negotiating leverage much reduced.
Senator, I would add that, as Mr. Elbaum was saying, one of our companies, a company called Blue Origin, founded by Mr. Bezos, they're working right now on developing a new engine, I think, to help alleviate the RD-180 problem, the BE-4 engine. I've been to that facility in Seattle. It is tremendously impressive what they're doing out there, as well as traveling to the SpaceX facility and what SpaceX is doing with their engine technology, and as well as with the commercial crew vehicle. I think they would like to be online and get us off our Russian dependence as soon as possible. But unfortunately, I think that date is no sooner than 2017.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate the testimony you've given. I appreciate your being here today. This was, I think, a very productive hearing. I would note for each of you the question of regulatory uncertainty was a question I believe all three of you raised. That is a significant concern of mine. And in moving forward with reauthorization of the Commercial Launch Act, regulatory reform is going to be a component that we're going to look at. And so I would welcome from each of the witnesses your specific ideas on reforms that would provide greater certainty, accelerate the development of either commercial crew or commercial launch, commercial cargo, and expand the commercial capacities we have. I will also note that the hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks. During that time, senators are asked to submit any questions for the record, and upon receipt, the witnesses are requested to submit their written answers to the committee as soon as possible. And with that, I want to thank each of you for being here. I want to thank our witnesses on the first panel, and the hearing is concluded.
Thank you.